This video is in response to Noah Antwiler's, maybe I won't pronounce his name correctly, otherwise known as Spoony's or Counter Monkey. Does anyone here speak chaotic neutral? First, I need to correct some things that Spoony said that is wrong. And I have to, because he made some statements in his video, which is funny. It's a nice video, but it's wrong. He says you really can't play original Dungeons and Dragons without chainmail. Okay. Now, I have here this is my original copy of Men and Magic. Now, this is the only one I've got of my original set, because, long story, the post office ate two of them. Yes, they were hungry and they ate two of them. But I bought, somewhere along the line, they'd reprinted, and it's fun to actually compare the changes in the one that I have with these. Now, you can play Dungeons and Dragons with just these three, with the original three books. They're thin, they're easy. That's OD&D. I highly recommend you add the fourth one, which is Chainmail. Greyhawk. You don't need Chainmail. They talk about using Chainmail. Now, I have a copy of Chainmail too. This is if you'll notice, this is the third edition. So I have Chainmail. I never used it, ever. We never played Chainmail. And perhaps it's because I learned Dungeons and Dragons in an unusual setting. What do I mean by that? As in my 20s, I was in the service. I was in the army in Germany, in Erlangen at Ferris Barracks, which now has been turned back to the Germans. And that's where I learned to play Dungeons and Dragons. And we played Dungeons and Dragons a lot. And I mean a lot. There was a time when I was running a game every night of the week. And we would start gaming on Friday night and game until Sunday morning, when we had to go back and start cleaning up and be prepared for inspections on Monday morning. Because we would game through the night, and we would, and we had a refrigerator full of stuff, and we would pull, we would be game for 48 hours. And so I gamed an awful lot, and I did a lot with the original three books. I remember when Blackmore came out, when it was released, and we bought Blackmore. And Blackmore was interesting. I've learned to appreciate Blackmore a lot more since then. And then Eldridge Wizardry, which I remember that, with its controversial cover. Oh, there is a scantily clad or nude female figure, and it was interesting. So you can play with just those. And the thing that makes it the other thing I disagree with Spoony is his comment, oh, you have to have alignment. And I was looking at this whole statement about alignment is false. And let me explain by that. In the original Dungeons and Dragons, page 9 of Men and Magic, you have one line. It says character alignment, including, there's a paragraph and then a line. It says character alignment, including various monsters and creatures. Before the games begins, it is not only necessary to select a role, but it is also necessary to determine whether what stance the character will take. law, neutrality, or chaos. People who never played OD&D, who've never played the three books, don't realize what Gygax did when he produced AD&D. There were three alignments, not nine. It was law, neutrality, and chaos. And that explains why you have the chart. Let's see if I can get that up there for just a little bit, of what creatures are in what alignment. Because are they lawful, or are they chaotic, or are they neutral? Now, that makes a lot more sense than what happened with AD&D, particularly when you talk about alignment language or whatever. Changing from law to neutrality, or changing from neutrality to chaos, or vice versa, any of those, those were a bigger deal, because it's the relationship to, do you respect law and order, or are you whoever's the most powerful in control? That's the real core. And it was Gygax in Greyhawk introduced the concepts. Let's see, character, let's see if I can find this here. It's where they started talking about, but only in relationship to certain monsters. And it was because they were talking about, I did some stuff with this earlier. Where did it, what about, it was the concept of evil and good, which were Gygax, not the original Dungeons and Dragons. There was no concept of good or evil in the original Dungeons and Dragons. It was law versus chaos. So what happens, I guess it was, maybe it was, but I'd have to find it, and I didn't prepare for that. But you don't need anything, and it's like, it's like, are you straight and narrow? That's where you get the concept of the paladin was primarily law, not lawful good, that he followed the law. If you've read what's the La Miserable, or you're familiar with the story, where the police officer follows, maybe I have this mixed up, I'm a little messed up anyway, but the police officer follows the guy the guy steals a couple of loaves of bread and goes to prison, and finally escapes, and the police officer is following him for the rest of his life, because he is bound to follow the law. And what the law was, the most important thing to him was the law, as opposed to someone who would be willing to compromise and not follow the law, like to steal bread to feed his children. And that's an interesting story, but that gives you a background of what was in OD&D. It's not this terrible thing that Gygax did with alignment, and it had, your alignment really didn't, and you could ignore it, and there wasn't much about it in original Dungeons and Dragons. That was all added by Gygax, and that was his take on it. It wasn't really that important, and you can play without alignment. And that's where I strongly disagree with Spoony. You have to, it's one of the core features of your character. No, it's completely optional. You don't need anything about alignment in there. It's helpful if you go back to the original three alignments, which is law, neutral, and chaos. And it makes a lot more sense to me. Do you follow, if there is a law, whether it's good, evil, or, the good or evil isn't an issue. You can have good laws, and you can have, today we use the phrase good laws and bad laws. A law that is worded improperly or whatever, or is just outdated or outmoded, and that you may view as a bad law. And then there are, quote, maybe evil laws where people manage to get certain things passed through into law which have horrible side effects. But if they're the law is the law, do you follow those, or do you make a moral judgment on whether the law is contextual? And that's the difference. You have the true law and order people stuck out way out to one side, and then you have the people who go, no, it's who's ever the most powerful is in charge. That's chaos. That's where you get the power of the orcs, and that they're not a lawful society. They're a chaotic society that whoever is the most powerful is in charge. And it follows that that's how their society works. It's not a matter of good and evil. It's a matter of they don't have particularly laws. You can do anything you want as long as you have the power to live by that. So this whole concept that you have to have alignment as part of your game is wrong. You don't. It wasn't in the original books, in the original OD&D. And you don't need chainmail. You can play with you could use chainmail, and what happens is the way the original books were written is that it referred to chainmail, and you can actually argue that this was done as a ploy to try and sell more copies of chainmail. That they said this was the preferred combat system, and then we use the alternate combat system. But everybody just used the alternate combat system that I knew. Nobody used the chainmail system, and maybe it was because we never used miniatures. I never used miniatures until I was in probably playing second edition. Because, well, first off, we were in, like I said, I started learning Dungeons and Dragons when I was in the service. So you couldn't go down to your local hobby store and pick up the miniatures because they weren't there. At least that we didn't find them there. I understood there was at the time when I was there a hobby store in Frankfurt, which would have been painful to get to. You know, it would have been hours on the bus to get to Frankfurt. I could have got there for free by taking there was a bus that went from post to post, but it would take hours to get there, and I'd heard that it wasn't a very good selection anyway. But that was there was the hobby store that was somewhat in English. I think there was a hobby store in Frankfurt. Now there were hobby stores. Don't get me wrong. The Germans had hobby stores, and there were miniatures you could find. I know that when I was in Erlangen, you could go. There was a place that sold miniatures, but they're not the fantasy miniatures. They're the old Napoleonic miniatures, and some of those were kind of expensive for me at the time. You know, but and those were very high quality and things like that. So you had Napoleonic miniatures in various sizes, but you didn't have fantasy miniatures because that hadn't really, at least where I was at, and there might have been some in the Erlangen University, which is there, but I didn't speak German, and trying to find a multilingual Dungeons and Dragons group back in the 70s was and early 80s would have been kind of hard to find. So what happens is that we tend to play with a bunch of other guys. Now it was, and because we were all guys in the service, I will admit some of our stuff was, shall we say, somewhat brutal compared to that. There were no ladies in our games because on the post I was on was a combat post. There were 3 women. There were 3 females on post at the time. And one of them I never met. She was the CW3. I heard about her, and they said she was a chief warrant officer in charge of the brigade motor pool. And they said, yeah, she was she really knew her stuff. I mean, she had a reputation about knowing more about a diesel engine than anybody else. That was what she. I never met her, never saw her. The other two ladies, there was one, there was an MP, and I can't remember what the other one was. And yeah, but and I had an office that overlooked there was a tennis court, and they would go out and play tennis, and the guys would all lust after them, including myself. But I was a young man, but there weren't many. There weren't, because it was a combat post, and women weren't allowed on combat posts because it was combat arms. Everything was combat, and so what happened is you didn't have any women playing Dungeons and Dragons, and at least in the groups that I had for years when I was in the service. And it was a bunch of guys, and we played a lot, an awful lot, and it was a lot of fun. But it was OD&D, and we didn't use chainmail, and we didn't use alignment. I mean, really, the alignment. Okay, you pick law, neutral, or chaos, but you weren't, even there you were shades of gray. It was how lawful versus how neutral versus how chaotic, and it lists men and various things that you had that, and people in the original Dungeons and Dragons, it's like dwarf, that's the people don't understand. The original Dungeons and Dragons had lots of restrictions on racial restrictions that you don't today in the newer one. Dwarves may opt only for the fighting class, and they never progress beyond 6th level. Think about what would happen today if you tried to put that kind of rule into 5th edition or any other edition. But that was a rule. That's out of Men and Magic. That's on page 7 of Men and Magic. So there were lots of restrictions on classes by what could be what class. Elves may begin either as fighting men or magic users and freely switch class whenever they choose. That was unusual. From adventure to adventure, but not during the course of a single game. So, it says, oh, this is the halfling one. This is the reprint. If I go back to the original, it says hobbits. Yeah, that was one of the things that they were forced to change because of a lawsuit. But the hobbits. Should any player wish to be one, he will be limited to the fighting men class as a hobbit. Now that was the change with Greyhawk. And Greyhawk introduced thieves. And the reason Greyhawk was so important was that where it really changed the game was if you play with only the first 3 books, all characters have 1 hit die, and it's a 6-sided die. And Greyhawk was the one that changed it to different sized dice. And you had fighters having an 8-sided die, and clerics having a 6-sided die, and thieves and magic users having 4-sided hit dice. And that was the interesting change. Then when they finally went to AD&D, they bumped fighters up to 10-sided die, and thieves to 6 and clerics to 8. But but if you take a look at this is the one in Greyhawk. Oh, here I find it. Change alignment. So what happens is that you see this is in Greyhawk. You can't read it. I should scan it in. But it talks about the alignment, and they have the asterisks. Oh, that's where they introduce the concept of evil is introduced in Greyhawk. And but it's chaos, and that's that they let's see, chaotic alignment, um, and so on, and they finally introduced evil into, and that was by Gygax and Kunsk, or whatever, I can't pronounce his last name. But you didn't need alignment. Alignment was an addition that it really wasn't a core part of the game, except your relationship to how lawful you were. If you were chaotic, you were completely opposed to the concept of law. And if you were neutral, which most things tended to be, or some shade of gray in between there, that was there. But it was a lot of, so Spoony's wrong. You didn't need that. And to be honest, I'll admit, I was part of the group that looked at those who played with the basic edition. We looked down on them. Today, the best analogy is, quote, the PC master race. So those who play video games on a PC versus those who play video games on a console. And we looked down on those who played with the basic and the expert edition. We thought that was stupid. Those were stupid rules. We didn't use them. That they were insipid, and they just didn't have the real bite of Dungeons and Dragons. We played OD&D, and then finally switched to AD&D, simply because that became the most popular, and that was the one that was pushed. And the big advantage to AD&D was you had all the rules consolidated, because the other thing I lost due to the post office was my original copies of the Strategic Review. I think I have one of them, and copies of the Dragon, because they became almost mandatory to have, to know the changes in the rules and the additional classes and things. There was the explosion of those type of things, those things that happened with the rules that came out. And AD&D finally consolidated things into primarily a single set, and everything else was viewed as optional, which is fine. Which is the way I tend to game with 5th edition. I take a look, and that's why I said I play with I like the fact that there's just 3 books. It goes back to the original, the concept of the original 3. They're not organized. They may be organized. Player's Handbook versus Dungeon Master's Guide versus Monster Manual. I guess that is a better slightly better organization than what you see in the original. But it was, and that's the real advantage, the organization and the consolidate. But the 5th edition, the indexes are awful, and they don't know anyway. But that's a different discussion. But Spoony was wrong. You didn't need anything else like that. And for me, I find it fun. Oh, he goes, this was the first real game, first edition that you could, first real one you can play. And I go, we look down at the people who went to that. I remember the first time watching somebody game that. There was a guy who came over to the service just before I was getting ready to get out of the service. And he came with the basic edition, or I think it was a red box or one of those, and we laughed. There were a bunch of us who go, see how stupid they are? They don't know how to play. And that was the truth. We poked fun at them. We were sort of, we were merciless, because we go, these rules are just horrible. They're insipid. They don't have the real bite, the real guts of original Dungeons and Dragons, and that was our view. And it wasn't mine alone. There were a bunch of us who felt that way. And so when Spoony makes these comments about original Dungeons and Dragons, I can tell he's never really played it. And he he basically said that. And you had to have that. And even if you did require chainmail is only another 44-page book. It was another $5 book. It was the same price as Greyhawk. And you really want Greyhawk, and you wanted these, and this was $10 for the original, so it was $20 total, which I guess is a lot more money than today, but than what was today. But they were, you didn't need chainmail, but you could use it. Don't know anybody who really did, but no, it's Spoony's wrong because he hasn't had that exposure to running original Dungeons and Dragons, and I think that's why my gaming is so much different than a lot of other people, because I started with OD&D, and alignment is, and the alignment languages, there's nothing about alignment languages in OD&D that I can remember, and even if it is, it's probably just one or two lines. But if it's the difference between law and chaos, that doesn't really make that big of a difference. Those were things that were introduced by Gygax, which is one of the reasons why I dislike Gygax. I mean, I thought what he did to the game was horrible. But I would have liked to have seen someone produce a comprehensive set of rules, taking all of the strategic review and the dragon and the first 7 books. They're up to 7. You have which is the supplement 4, which is gods, demigods, and heroes, in addition to Blackmoor and Eldritch Wizardry. So you can, if you'd have taken the first 4 plus or I guess no, first 3 plus the 4 supplements, and put them together, plus some of the additions that were added through the strategic review and the dragon, to produce a consolidated set of rules, that would have been useful, and it would have, just because it's nicely indexed. But I don't think TSR has ever known how to really produce a good index. That's another whole story. But Spoony was wrong. If you like my video, press the thumbs up button. I'd appreciate that. Or if this interests you, you can always subscribe to my channel. There's a button right above. I look forward to hearing some comments. Tell me what you think about this, and I'll try and reply, and we can see if I'll do some more of these. Thank you.